All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about what's going on in the economy right now. So obviously the stock market isn't doing so great. And, you know, there was a quick drop, and it went up a little bit again, and it dropped again. Who knows what's going to happen tomorrow, okay? I have no idea. And if you are listening to someone who tells you they know what's going to happen with the stock market tomorrow, they're lying to you, okay? Nobody knows. But what I really want to talk about in this video are the implications that a recession has on people, okay? So in other words, the implication of a declining stock market on everyday people. So if you listen to the traditional economic theory or the traditional economists, they will tell you that a recession is bad for everyone. Why is this? Well, obviously if you're a shareholder, then a recession means you're losing money in your investments, right? If you are, whether you're just somebody with a 401k or whether you're somebody who has BlackRock investments, you're losing money if there's a recession, right? Or a depression. But traditional economic theory also says that recessions are bad for non-shareholders, right? For perhaps unskilled employees who don't have money to invest. So why is that? If you don't own shares, how could a recession possibly affect you? Well, this is because the shareholders control the corporations. So what that means is that when a recession occurs and they lose profits, they're going to pass their losses and they're going to pass it on to their employees. In other words, they're going to lay their employees off or they're going to cut their wages or something, right? So the reason that recessions are bad for everyday people who are not shareholders is because it's the shareholders who employ them. It's the shareholders who control the workplace, right? So we cannot forget this step in the process. Oftentimes, the traditional economic theory assumes that this is unavoidable, that the employer must pass their losses onto the employee or even onto the consumer. This is not true at all. The reason this occurs is because the economy is currently being controlled by a few people for a few people. The solution to this is for the economy to be controlled by the masses for the masses, right? In other words, we have to democratize the workplace. Now, there are two ways to do that, okay? And I say this in a lot of videos. The two ways are with economic policy. That means government regulation of the economy. Perhaps that looks like higher taxes on the rich people, which then funds welfare programs, for example. And the other solution is free market labor movements, capitalistic free market labor movements. So in other words, capitalism actually offers solutions to the problems that capitalism is currently presenting with. Capitalism doesn't necessitate that profits be given to only a few rich people. The reason capitalism currently gives profits to a bunch of rich people is because the working class is unorganized. So if the working class leverages, again, economic policy or free market labor movements to take control of the means of production, take back control of the means of production, take control of the workplace, then all of a sudden a recession does not affect employees at all. Why? Because the employees control whether they fire themselves or not. In other words, again, it's so long as the economy is controlled by a few people for a few people, yes, the traditional economic theory is correct. The shareholders will pass their losses on to their employees. But if the working class leverages unions and worker cooperatives and boycotts and strikes or economic policy to reclaim the value of their labor, then all of a sudden recessions don't actually exist. This is the interesting thing, is that a recession doesn't have to be bad for anyone. Recessions, in fact, what I'll say is this: the value of the stock market will drop to zero. And I mean zero if every company translates into a worker cooperative. Why is this? Well, because all of a sudden, all of the profits that company creates are being given straight to the workers. In other words, dividends are dissolved into working class wages if a company is a worker cooperative. So a stock market can drop. The value of a stock market can drop to zero and still not affect employees. The only reason a stock market decline, a recession, affects employees is because the interests of a few people are being protected because those few people control the economy and they control the corporations. And this checks out, right? Because when there's a recession and corporations lay a bunch of employees off, there's nothing that's physically keeping those employees from going to work and doing the same and creating the same exact value the day before they got laid off. The only thing keeping those employees from going back to work is some paycheck, right? Is the fact that a few people decided they can't afford to pay their employees. But again, the value we create is being translated into money. And in that translation, that is where the problem occurs. It's not, in that translation, that is where the exploitation occurs. People are manipulated and exploited, and the value of their labor is taken from them by the few, right? By the ruling class. So we have to realize this. We have to understand that there is a crucial step that occurs when a recession punishes employees. And that step can only occur if the employees give control of the workplace to the employers. So the working class has to leverage their power against employers. Currently, the ruling class, the employers, the shareholders, the board of directors, the investment banks, they are the ones leveraging the power. And the working class is sitting there with their thumb up their ass because they're too busy fighting over race and gender and whatnot. We have to organize in the workplace to avoid this exploitation. You have to realize that when someone exploits somebody else, it requires a surrender to the exploitation. Every time somebody is exploited, it requires a surrender to the exploiter. Okay? And if you look at the numbers right now, roughly 3% of the population is classified as an owner by the government census. That means 97% of people are sitting there with their thumbs up their asses getting exploited by 3%. Why are we letting this happen to ourselves? It doesn't make any sense. The reason we're letting it happen is because we're too distracted again by those culture wars, by those gender wars, those race wars, those religious wars, even those political wars, right? We're sitting here blaming Republicans and Democrats instead of working together to reclaim the value of our labor in the workplace. We have to understand something. It's that the reason people collect money is because they fear poverty, okay? That applies to everybody. Nobody wants to be living on the street. Nobody wants to be sleeping on the bench in the winter. Nobody wants to be going hungry. Nobody wants to have to avoid the doctor when they're sick, right? The reason we collect money is because money is the medium by which we insulate ourselves from our fears of poverty. Sorry about the cut. My phone died. So what I was saying is that people use money to insulate themselves from their fear of poverty. Billionaires are very good at this, okay? And they seek control over the means of production, control over resources, in order to guarantee their well-being, okay? But when they push that too far, they end up infringing on someone else's well-being. They end up infringing on the well-being of the working class. And the working class has to respond in kind. They have to gain control over the means of production in order to protect themselves. And again, like I said, it's 97 to 3% here. The working class are the masses. So they have to, again, leverage working class movements like perhaps unions, strikes, boycotts, right? But above all, labor. So the working class are the laborers. The labor creates the necessities, and by extension, everyone needs necessities, right? So if the working class can threaten to remove the billionaire's access to necessities, then all of a sudden, the billionaire will concede their control over the means of production. Because what happens is the threat posed by that working class leverage surpasses the threat posed by the billionaire's loss of control over the means of production. Okay, and what I can say is that, like, when the inclination to control and exploit others is overcome by the threat created by too much control and exploitation, concessions emerge, right? The working class and the ruling class have to start working together lest they tear each other apart. And in that revolutionary moment, who knows what happens, right? The average billionaire might have a few bodyguards. They might live in a gated community, but they're not safe, right? We saw what happened with that CEO of the guy murdered in New York, right? This violence is not the solution we want, because it only makes the billionaire more scared. Only makes the billionaire use the leverage they have to protect themselves. And that ultimately means more manipulation and exploitation in the market and in the government, ultimately. Bottom line, work together with your working class employees, with your fellow co-workers, and don't demonize the billionaire. You have to empathize with the billionaire and realize that they're just like you. They're just a scared human being who only has one life, and they're terrified of that life being taken from them, or of suffering in that life. So, unfortunately, the billionaire has come to believe that money is the way to solve those fears. And when that goes too far, they infringe on the well-being of others, and that creates, again, it creates tension. The solution here is always empathy. If we empathize with the billionaire and we leverage peacefully the free market labor movements and the government economic policy, we can take back control of the means of production and put it in the hands of the masses. The goal here isn't to crucify the billionaire and the rich shareholder. The goal is to expand the ruling class to include the working class. We don't want to flip the script and jail all of the ruling class, because that threat just makes them defend themselves. It just encourages self-defense mechanisms. We want to, again, expand the ruling class to include the current working class and ultimately the current ruling class. There's a lot of abundance today. We have so much technology that has been the product of cumulative advancements for thousands of years. If we leverage that technology to create abundance for everybody, then we don't have to toil with money at all. We don't have to worry about competing for wages, or competing in the economy, or competing in the stock market. We can just all enjoy the abundance that we have created, that our ancestors worked tirelessly for, right? We wouldn't have computers today if the thousands of scientists over the past millennia did not do the work they did, right? It's like we're kind of just missing the bigger picture because we're afraid. We're not aware of our own motivations, and those motivations are ultimately fear. Okay, fear is your only god. I think David LaRoche said that in some Rage Against the Machine song. I'll link that song in the description. Maybe you like it. Thanks for watching.